Russia's back with new demands, but Ukraine responds with through diplomacy. No surrender, no retreat. A powerful explosion shakes a chemical plant near Moscow. Another drone, another fail by Russian air defenses. President Donald Trump says more weapons are coming. Ukraine must be able to defend itself. And a critical week begins with major international talks on Ukraine's recovery and justice. Welcome to Ukraine Today. I'm Zaroslava Kolesnikova, and these are the headlines you can't afford to miss. Russia is once again trying to dictate terms, this time through an interview with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in a Hungarian outlet. His so-called conditions for Ukraine come off as both outrageous and desperate, but Kiev isn't staying silent. Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs responded with a sharp rebuke, saying denazification should start in Moscow, not in Ukraine. Why is the Kremlin making these demands now? What's behind the timing and tone of Lavrov's latest rhetoric? And how does Ukraine's bold response shift the narrative? Let's break it down.
Republican Senator and member of the Foreign Relations Committee Tim Scott rejected accusations of Trump having a soft policy toward the Russian dictator. In an interview with Fox News, he assured that President Trump is fully in control of the situation. When asked whether Putin had used the pause to intensify attacks on Ukraine, Scott replied that he's completely confident in Donald Trump's ability to navigate the situation and resolve major conflicts. He added that he expects arms supplies to Ukraine to resume.
President Trump did what he has always done, namely focused on finding solutions and ways to end the conflict. We just heard him say that Putin is killing thousands of people unnecessarily.
The Kremlin, it seems, has not yet been impressed by the US president's diplomatic efforts. The head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, voiced Moscow's ultimatums in an interview with the Hungarian publication Magyar Nemzet. The Kremlin is demanding, and I quote, the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, recognition of the territories occupied by the Russian army, as well as the lifting of anti-Russian sanctions and the return of frozen Russian assets. Also, according to him, Kyiv must abandon its legal claims against Moscow. According to Lavrov, all these provisions must be set out in a legally binding agreement on a peaceful settlement. The rhetoric of the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry once again demonstrates that the Kremlin rejects efforts to achieve peace and instead resorts to ultimatums, just as it did in 2022, the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs noted.
True denazification should begin in Moscow. Given their attitude toward other ethnic groups, Azerbaijanis and other peoples of the South Caucasus, Central Asia, Ukrainians, Crimean Tatars, and others, we call on our partners to immediately impose new tough sanctions against these Russian denazifiers to bring them back to reality. Heori Taiki, spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on the social network X.
Russia has no intention of stopping the war against Ukraine. Experts believe that negotiating for peace is not in the Kremlin's interests.
You just need to understand the current trend, the escalation of military actions. Whether it's our successes or our failures, whatever Russia does, it's either raising the stakes for negotiations or the negotiations themselves are just a smokescreen for continuing the war.
Instead of the full and comprehensive ceasefire proposed by the US and supported by Ukraine, which would have been the first step toward peace, the Kremlin continues to push meaningless propaganda about denazification and the root causes of the war, putting forward deliberately unacceptable conditions to Ukraine and its partners. Once again, Moscow is demonstrating that it is not seeking peace. With its peacekeeping rhetoric, the Kremlin is trying to mislead the international community and buy time to continue the war. The Center for Countering Disinformation under the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine on Telegram.
After his latest phone conversation with the Kremlin dictator, the US president stated that he is considering the possibility of new sanctions against Russia. Putin told Trump that Russia will not abandon its military objectives in Ukraine and made it clear that he is not interested in peace. He wants to go all the way and keep killing people, and that's unacceptable, noted Donald Trump.
We had a call. It was a rather long call. We talked about many things, including Iran. We also talked, as you know, about the war in Ukraine. And I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy. I haven't made any progress on this at all.
President Trump has not yet imposed any new sanctions against Russia, and in some cases his administration has even eased existing restrictions, writes the New York Times, citing trade and corporate documentation. Without new sanctions, the existing measures lose their effectiveness. The White House has scaled back efforts to enforce existing restrictions, making it easier for Russia to purchase products needed for its military-industrial complex. In particular, Moscow has gained the ability to use new shell companies to transfer funds to Russia and supply critically important components, including computer chips and military equipment. Victoria Smirnova for Freedom Television Channel.
Big moves are coming. President Zelensky says Ukraine is preparing new powerful agreements with its allies, ones that will strengthen both the battlefields and the path to recovery. On July 10th, the coalition of the willing meets during the UK-France summit to focus on support for Ukraine. At the same time, Rome will host a major Ukraine recovery conference gathering global leaders for the US, EU and beyond. What deals will be made? What new aid will be unlocked? Let's find out.
Every day, the army of the aggressor country shells peaceful Ukrainian cities. In 1 week, Russia launched 1,270 drones, 39 missiles, and nearly 1,000 guided aerial bombs (KBs) at Ukraine. On the night of the 7th of July, Zaporizhzhia, Kyiv, Sumy, Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, and Odessa regions came under attack by the Russian army. Ukraine needs help from its partners to strengthen its air defense, President Volodymyr Zelensky stated.
We are counting heavily on our partners to fulfill everything we have agreed upon. Air defense is the most important thing for protecting lives. We are also already moving quite dynamically in implementing agreements on investments in our own weapons production, particularly all types of drones. Special attention is being given to interceptor drones. We are contracting as much as possible. Thank you to all partners who are helping. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Danish Foreign Minister Lars Rasmussen has called for increased investment in Ukraine's defense sector. To this end, he said it would be appropriate to use frozen Russian assets. Denmark plans to address this issue during its presidency of the EU.
The most obvious starting point is to increase investment in Ukraine. They could probably produce twice as much military equipment as they do now if they had the resources for it. Lars Rasmussen, Danish Foreign Minister, in a comment to the Danish outlet DR.
At the end of June, Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Denmark would become the first country with which Kyiv would begin joint defense production outside of Ukraine. This concerns the production of drones and long-range systems. This is a response to the growing Russian missile threats and a key to strengthening air defense, emphasized the president of Ukraine. Weapons production could begin as early as the fall of 2025, according to the Danish Minister of Defense. Ukraine has also reached agreements on joint UAV production with several US companies, the president of Ukraine reported. This involves hundreds of thousands of units, including interceptor drones. The president of Ukraine discussed the possibilities of joint weapons production with the head of the White House. Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized that Kyiv is ready for direct projects with Washington. Donald Trump told reporters that he had a good conversation with Volodymyr Zelensky and noted that they discussed the possibility of sending Patriot missile systems to Kyiv.
I don't want to see 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 soldiers dying every week. There are other people as well, but for the most part so far it has mainly been soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers. But that's 5,000 souls, and it's killing every week. Right now it's actually even more.
German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius intends to discuss military aid to Ukraine during his visit to Washington, according to German media citing German government spokesperson Stefan Cornelius. He confirmed that Berlin intends to purchase 2 Patriot surface-to-air missile systems from the US for Ukraine. Germany has sent a request to U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and is awaiting Washington's commitment to transfer the missile systems to Berlin.
It is likely that the possible purchase and transfer will be discussed on the 9th of July, when Friedrich Merz will receive NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. The next day, the Chancellor will head to the conference on Ukraine's reconstruction in Rome, where Zelensky is also expected to be a guest. In the corridors, he could talk with Merz about the possible deal and above all about further support for Ukraine. From a publication by Wirtschaftswoche.
Berlin will continue its initiative to support the Ukrainian air defense system, the German government assured. Around €1 billion have already been raised as part of this program. In addition, Germany is interested in creating joint defense enterprises with Ukraine and continues to invest in the production of Ukrainian weapons in order to make the most of Ukraine's manufacturing capabilities. Kristina Dombrovskaya for Freedom Television Channel.
Panic near the Russian capital. A powerful explosion rocked a chemical plant in Krasnozavodsk just outside Moscow. And once again, Russia's air defense couldn't stop it. The site is known for supplying materials to the Russian military-industrial complex. After the blast, silence for officials, chaos in a local chat and a clear sign, Ukraine's long-range strike are reaching deeper than ever. What exactly was hit, how was it done, and what does it say about Russia's growing vulnerability?
Monday morning in the Moscow region started not with coffee but with the sound of drones. "70 kilometers from the Russian capital, residents of the city of Krasnozavodsk suddenly remembered that the war is closer than they'd like. There was a rumble in the sky, panic in the local chats, and at the local factory a series of explosions and plumes of smoke.
That's it, it's turning now. They stall here too. Looks like they found their target today.
In the footage, you can see the drones flying low and hitting the target precisely. According to Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council, the strikes were not random.
In Russia's Moscow region, the Krasnozavodsk chemical plant was attacked. They produce explosives, gunpowder and components for ammunition and missile weapons there. This facility is a link in the technological chain that supplies the Russian army with artillery shells, MLRS and ballistic missiles.
Local residents heard about 7 explosions. However, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported as usual. All targets were destroyed, no hits were recorded. Meanwhile, the local governor, Andrei Vorobyov, is avoiding comments regarding the attack on the facility. But he is providing detailed reports about another incident, the crash of unidentified drones in the neighboring Sergeyevo-Posadsky district.
2 people were injured. A 60-year-old man suffered a closed head injury and lost 3 teeth. A 40-year-old man sustained an open neck wound and a chest contusion. Both were taken to the Sergeyevo-Posad hospital. Doctors are providing care. The victims are in moderate condition. There is no threat to their lives.
A game of silence. This is yet another admission of defeat by their air defense. The publication Defense Express analyzed the video from the scene. Journalists claim that these UAVs have already successfully breached the dense air defense ring around Moscow, the so-called concrete belt, more than once.
The FP-1 not only broke through to the target located north of Moscow. In the footage, there is no sign or sound of any air defense systems in operation. Moreover, this is not the first attack by this drone on the area, because on the night of the 4th of July, these same Ukrainian long-range drones attacked the Research Institute of Applied Chemistry in the city of Sergeyev-Posad, which is only 12 kilometers from Krasnozavodsk.
So, as always, Russia reports on the effective work of their air defense. But the facts tell a different story. Drones, reaching their targets more and more often, are striking right at the heart of the enemy's military infrastructure. Yuri Kutsi, Podrobnosti, Inter-Television Channel, Marathon, United News.
A major shift in rhetoric from the White House. US President Donald Trump has announced what Washington will provide Ukraine with additional weapons to help repel Russian aggression. They must be able to defend themselves, Trump told reporters, signaling renewed support for Kyiv. What kind of aid could be on the way, and what does these statements mean for future US policy on Ukraine? Let's break it down.
the United States will provide Ukraine with additional defensive weapons. The Pentagon has now officially announced this, and the corresponding statement has appeared on the department's website. This happened by order of President Trump, who, let me remind you, stated, Ukrainians should not be dying en masse under Russian missiles. At the same time, the ministry adds that the task of assessing military supplies around the world remains in effect. Let me remind you, just recently, Trump's favorite newspaper, the New York Post, called on him in an editorial to arm Ukraine.
We will send them more weapons. We simply have to. Ukrainians must be able to defend themselves. They are having a very hard time right now. The strikes are very intense. We will have to send more weapons, primarily defensive ones. That is the top priority.
The European Union is preparing the toughest sanctions against Russia in the past 3 years. This was stated by France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot in a comment to national television. At the center of the new package is the energy sector, specifically Russian revenues from oil sales, as well as financial players both within Russia and abroad. This concerns in particular individuals and companies that help the Kremlin circumvent already imposed restrictions. Notably, the discussions are taking place not only among Europeans, but also in coordination with American senators.
Since Russia has made no progress on the front lines, Putin is content, so to speak, with a rain of missiles, shelling residential areas and killing many civilians. All of this must stop immediately, and that is why we are further depleting Putin's resources, which have so far allowed him to continue this devastating war.
A deafening week for Ukraine is underway. President Volodymyr Zelensky has announced a series of major international events, all centered on Ukraine. From rebuilding war-torn regions to securing long overdue justice, the agenda is packed. With summits in Rome and London, world leaders are coming together to reaffirm their commitment to Ukraine defense, recovery and future. What will be decided? What support will arrive next? Let's dive into what this week could mean for Ukraine and for the war.
Trump's special envoy is heading to Rome to discuss Ukraine's recovery. According to Kyiv Post, Keith Kellogg is visiting the Italian capital, where an international conference will be held on Thursday and Friday. It has not yet been announced who else will be part of the American delegation. However, according to some media outlets, Kellogg plans to meet with Volodymyr Zelensky. Trump's special envoy thanked the Ukrainian president the day before, commenting on his conversation with the American counterpart.
Announcer. We also thank President Zelensky for his condolences regarding the terrible loss of life during the flooding in Texas, especially among the youth. Both presidents acknowledged the pain of losing young people, both in times of peace and in times of war. Compassion is a key part of leadership.
Katerina Fedorchenko, the President of the European Commission, the Chancellor of Germany, the Prime Minister of Poland and other world leaders will also attend the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome. Meanwhile, the President of France and the Prime Minister of Britain will convene a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing via video link on the same day to discuss increasing military assistance to Ukraine. In Paris, they also stated that the purpose of the meeting is to ensure the restoration of the Ukrainian army and the deployment of forces at the right moment to guarantee security within the framework of a possible ceasefire. An important week for Ukraine is how President Zelensky announced this week.
Volodymyr Zelensky. We are preparing new decisions, new agreements with our partners that will make Ukraine stronger, both in defense and in recovery. The coming week will be largely and significantly dedicated to Ukraine's recovery efforts, new agreements with international partners, and, to a very great extent, the comprehensive restoration of justice.
Katerina Fedorchenko. This Wednesday, the European Court of Human Rights is expected to deliver a verdict in the case of Ukraine and the Netherlands versus Russia. This is a consolidated lawsuit concerning human rights violations in the temporarily occupied territories of Donbas, including the illegal abduction of Ukrainian children, forced labor and torture, the downing of flight MH17 in 2014, and gross human rights violations during the full-scale invasion. Katerina Fedorchenko, TSN, 1+1, Marathon, United News.
That's all for today on Ukraine Today. Don't forget to like, share and leave a comment. Your voice matters. Support independent coverage, become a sponsor and help us keep telling the truth. Stay strong, stay informed and stay with Ukraine. See you next time.